welcome to The Problem Was Me. I'm your host, Tom Gagliano. I'm a best-selling author, family dynamics expert, and social worker. And we'll be discussing childhood messages and their impact on addiction, the intimacy we have or don't have, our parenting skills, the careers we choose, even the roles we're set up to play in life. Do you put other people's needs ahead of your own? Do you have a hard time sharing your feelings? Do you feel invisible? Do you have a hard time saying no to others? Do you have an inner voice screaming for help, but yet you're so afraid of allowing others to hear this voice? Well, you've come to the right show. I'll be touching upon these issues and much more from my personal and professional experiences to help you end the negative self-talk and take your life to a new level. The Problem Was Me starts now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Problem Was Me with your host, me, Tom Gagliano. So I hope by listening to these podcasts, you could take some nuggets of wisdom out that can help you enrich your life. Remember, you don't have to agree with everything I say. Take what you can that you can use, leave the rest right here. So I teach a methodology based on overcoming my own shortcomings and experiences I've learned in helping individuals, couples, and parents build healthier relationships with themselves and others. Never forget, the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself. You are the common denominator in all your other relationships. So we're all affected by childhood messages, but do we realize how those messages affect us in our adult life? Now, this is not about bashing parents. Let me tell you right now. But together, let's analyze these messages. Let's look at the messages we inherited that have helped us, the ones we want to keep, the healthy ones. And let's identify some of the messages that need some attention. Childhood messages impact every part of our life, to the intimacy we have but don't have, our parenting skills, careers that we choose in life. What about the roles we're set up to play? The people pleaser role. How many of you listening to this have such a problem saying no? You feel like you're such a bad person if you say no. What about that caretaker role, where you put other people's feelings ahead of your own, like I did in childhood? If my mom wasn't happy, then I couldn't be happy. What about that defiant role, where you don't want to listen to rules, you don't want to listen to nothing, and you can't say you're sorry? Comes from a controlled childhood. What about that invisible role, where you just feel like you got lost in your childhood? You don't know how to nurture people. Not that you don't want to, you don't know how. And you don't know how to be nurtured. Or the perfectionist role, where you run to dilemma, never able to celebrate your victories. Or one of my roles, the addictive role, where I used addiction as an intimacy substitute. I didn't trust people or God for my emotional needs, but I needed something to regulate my feelings, to medicate my pain, and I found addictions to do that. In my book, The Problem Was Me, I talk about this warden, this fictitious character that sat on my shoulder, intrusive messages my whole life telling me I didn't deserve to be happy, I was never going to succeed, and don't trust anyone. All they're going to do is want something from you if they're nice to you. And in my book, The Problem Was Me, I talk about 3 key essentials to stop this intrusive inner voice and take your life to a new level. 1 is awareness, 2 is actions, 3 is maintenance. Without awareness, I don't know what actions to take. And without actions, there's really nothing to maintain. If I'm going to the doctor and my shoulder's the problem and he's working on my foot, I ain't getting anywhere. I got to build that awareness first. And if I build that awareness, the choices I need to take become clearer. And the third piece, if I maintain those choices, that is building healthy messages, I will improve my life and I will help those around me also improve their life. So ask yourself, are you playing the role that you want to play? And if the answer is no, let's work on changing that role. Now, in this podcast, I'm going to say a couple of sentences twice because they're important and I want you to hear them. Here's the first one. People never change who need to change their role. People only change their role when they want to change their role. People never change when they need to change their role. They only change when they want to change their role. How do you begin to want to? You have to build willingness. Because if you don't, you're going to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We know what that definition is. How do you create willingness? Usually, willingness is created when I'm not getting something I really want in my life, or I'm losing something I really want in my life. That's how you begin to build the willingness to want to change, not need to change, want to change. So about 10 years ago, I left the world of business and I had two goals. One was to give my children the healthy and positive messages that were denied to me in my own childhood. I came from a very bad childhood. Two was to help other people that came from traumatized childhoods, from addictions, stop sabotaging their lives. They were powerless. They didn't know how to stop that. So those were my two goals. Another important statement I'm going to make. I'm going to say it twice. Remember, a child that doesn't feel like they are important to their caregivers, to their parents, they won't stop loving their parents or caregivers. They'll stop loving themselves. Say it again. A child that doesn't feel like they're important to their caregivers or parents won't stop loving their caregivers or parents. They'll stop loving themselves. Even parents that are good parents, they're working hard, they're trying to save for college, a better house, and do all of these things for their kids. I warn you that your children may not see it through your lenses. Children are egocentric. I learned this in my master's degree in Rutgers. They only see how things affect them. They don't look at what my parents are doing for the future. Pay attention to your children. Be curious with them. What was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? Very important. So life could look like a jigsaw puzzle, right? We got pieces scattered all over. We don't know how they all fit. Well, let me tell you something. When a client comes to me and I go over their childhood messages and their experiences and the intrusive voices that come from those messages, believe me when I tell you those pieces fit quite clearly, because our childhood messages unleash a tsunami of thoughts, ideas, messages, voices throughout our lives. We may manipulate the truth of them, we may deny them, but they're going to show up, especially when we get fearful in our adult life. We'll go back to those self-surviving mechanisms we did as a child. Shut down, run away, rage with anger. We'll go back to all of these self-survival methods that in childhood kept us safe. So we can't deny the existence of these messages. They're very powerful. So I'm going to take some time now, and I want to go back over who I was, who I became, and how I've helped other people bring their life to a better level. Silence all of that crap that they learned throughout their lives, telling them they weren't good enough, telling them they wouldn't succeed. Even in business, I consult with a lot of people in business to stop that negative messaging that makes them procrastinate, makes them stop. So let's time travel a little bit with me, please. So I grew up in a tough childhood. My dad was an alcoholic, a gambler, and a womanizer. And when he came home drunk, he was going to hurt someone. First, my mother, either physically or verbally. Oh, he's terrible with his verbal messaging. And then me. I was the caretaker, parentified, came to my mother's rescue and caught a lot of beatings. And one day he caught me good. He got me with a good left hook, and I couldn't move my jaw. I was about 11 years old. And he came to my room afterwards and he said, please, don't stop loving me. Please forgive me. And I want you to forget everything that happened tonight. And like a good son, I said, I will, Dad. I will. You think I forgot about that? You think that doesn't show up in my adult life? Now, my mother also used to take me to hotels. She used to knock on the hotel door when my father was with another woman. She'd go hide. Father or the woman would open the door, see me, and fireworks would start. Just once, I wanted somebody to say, hey, Tom, how you feeling? This has got to be tough for you. Just once. Now, I went to a Catholic school that was no better. I was physically touched inappropriately a few times by a religious person. But here's what was even worse. This Catholic school used to call somebody to the office, elementary school. They used to go to the office, the kid, they used to shut the door, put the intercom on so the whole school could hear, and they beat the kid with a paddle so the whole school could hear it. And I remember one day, it was about the 5th grade, they called the student in front of me down to the office, and just a puddle of urine went right down the aisle. She was terrified. Ironically, her mom was just picking her up to go to the doctor. But back then, if you went home and said to if I went home anyway and said to my mom what happened and my dad, they'd say, what did you do to cause that? So I learned a safety piece, very important here. A message is shut up, shut down, and don't talk about your feelings. I carried that right into my adult life, and boy, it did not help me at all. So as I got older, I went to 4 different high schools in 4 different years. My father and mother, here's a Guinness Book of World Records. They were divorced from each other 3 times. We didn't even know if they were married or not. You know what saved me when I went to these high schools? What saved me was that I was very good in sports. And because of that, I was very popular. But I went out of line a little. I want to go back a little bit. I eliminated people and God from my life. I needed something as a higher power, and I choose money. When I was 11 years old, I used to go and buy these 6-packs of soda with ice, and I used to sell these 6-packs. And I used to sell them, and I used to sell them for 25 cents. I bought it for 10, and I make $20. So money became my higher power. So as I grew older, I realized money was the key. So when I got to my early 20s, I had cancer. I developed cancer. I had two tumors in my bladder. I tell this story because it's very, very important for you to hear the power of childhood messages. My father would take me from treatments after I had the operation. And I saw a part of my father I never saw before. He was sad. He cared about me. He showed me concern. I'll never forget that. I was in a lot of pain from the cystoscopes for 5 years, but I felt very close to my father for the first time. And here's the crazy thing. And I'll say this because it doesn't make sense, but it does make sense. When I get sick as an adult, 45 years later, and I'm under those covers with 101 fever, there's a feel good that comes over me. There's a connection of sickness with being warmth. And I believe that was because of what my father showed me. You may think I'm crazy. Maybe you're right. But that's what comes over me when I get sick. There's a warmth that comes over me. Does it make sense? No. So as I grew up, I became very, very successful in business. Unfortunately, I was also very into my addictions, and I was destroying my life. I made a fortune, and I was losing fortunes. And my wife left me. And I realized I wasn't in control of my addictions. They were in control of me. I was going from addiction to addiction, switching seats on the Titanic, thinking things were better. So I had a choice. Either the world was going to change, I was going to change the world, or the world was going to change me. Easy to change me because my wife and kids left me. We're going to take a break now. Hope you come back as we begin. Recovery continues. So I began my road to recovery. I started to go to 12-step meetings. I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Therapist? Sure. Never told them the truth. I would go to the meeting early, leave. I would go to the meeting late, leave early, get the heck out of there. And I hated when I got caught and these guys are hugging each other. What the heck is that about? Until one day a guy caught me at the door and said, where you going? Help me with the chairs. This guy later became my sponsor. So I had 2 major events that changed my life. The first one was with my father, of all people. My father was in Alcoholics Anonymous for 15 years, and he became a very different person, a wonderful grandfather to my children. But to me, I still had issues with him. My mother called me up one night. She said, listen, you should go visit your father. He had had cancer, and his cancer spread all over. And she said, he doesn't have long to live. And I went to the hospital one night, and I walked on the floor, and I saw a priest, and I said, do me a favor. My father's in room whatever it was, bed 2. He's got no spirituality, never went to church. Could you go see him, please? And the priest went in to see him. He came out. He said, your father's in bed 2? I said, yeah. Because that guy's got more spirituality than anybody I know. What? Where'd he get that from? I walked in, I sat near him. And we were talking about baseball, we were talking about current events, whatever. And I got up to leave. And he was all hooked up. He was very weak, very frail. And I touched his hand to leave. He said, please sit down. I sat down. He said, I was sitting where you were sitting 20 years ago. And my father was dying of cancer. And I never was able to tell him I loved him. I never was able to tell him how much I cared for him. I don't want that to happen to you. I don't want you to suffer. So I got up from the chair and he pulled me and hugged me and he started to cry. I never saw my father cry again. He called me a little girl if I cried when I was a kid. These were real tears. I walked out of that room and all addicts can relate to this. I didn't know how to regulate that pain, regulate that conflict. All I knew was when I felt those feelings, I needed an addiction. And I remember saying, God, help me, please. I want to run to every addiction and make up some new ones. And I walked to the elevator and it opened. And out came a guy from one of my 12-step meetings. I went over and hugged him. He must have said, I didn't know Tom liked me this much. But he was there for me. And the crazy thing was, about a day later, my father and mother realized they weren't married because nobody knew if they were married or divorced. They got married in the hospital all hooked up with a mayor. But here's the most important part of the story. When the wake came, there was about 12 people from the meetings I went to. I never told them about my father. How'd they find out? I felt important. One of the first times in my life, I felt like I mattered to people. They cared about me. There was no payback. They cared. And I jumped in with 2 feet at that point. I started to run step work in my basement, Mondays and Saturdays with a lot of people. And then my second experience that taught me the methodology I do today was with my son. We had to put our dog to sleep. And my son was very close to this dog. 10 years, he was 10 and the dog was 10. And after we put him to sleep, my son went into his bedroom. And I knew I got to do something, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't have this version of intimacy from my parents. I just knew. I walked into his room. I said, are you okay? He said, I'm okay, Dad. I put his arms around my chest. I put his head on my shoulder. And he started to cry and cry and cry. I knew I was giving my son a safe place. Place to cry in his father's arms. Place I never had as a kid. My children know that they can make mistakes. Doesn't mean they are a mistake. That they could fail at times. Doesn't mean they're a failure. And then I started to run my groups in childhood messaging. They suggested I meet a Dr. Abraham Twersky, which I did. They said, tell him your methodology, write a transcript, give it to him. He saw it, and Dr. Twersky was a renowned author. He wrote for Charles Schultz. He said, we got to get this out. Psychiatrists and therapists got to read this. This is the thinking of an addict and how you get better. The thinking of people, the roles they get stuck in, how to get out of it. We got to get this out. I didn't know this stuff. It got out. It became a bestseller. And then my support group told me something I didn't want to hear. You need to go back to school for your master's degree. You know, some kind of support groups, you want to tell them where they can go. But I took direction. And for some reason, Rutgers accepted me for my master's degree. I had an advantage, though. I had 2 sponsees that were going there for their master's degree. And their wife said, you better help this guy. So on a September morning, I walked out of my house on the front step. And I had my little loose leaf paper, my little bottle of water, pencil sharpener. I'm going back 30 years now. And I went back to Rutgers, being mad at God. I walked into the wrong building at the wrong time, and I was fit to be tied. God, why are you doing this to me? I walked into the class, and it was a guy in the class, the professor in the front of the wall, and he saw me walk in. He stopped, and he said, Tom, he was the guy that came to my groups. He walked over. Imagine a gossip in the cafeteria. Imagine the talk they were going to talk about, the students seeing all this. He put his arm on my shoulder. He said, look, I don't know what you're doing here, but I'm going to tell you what you told me. Get your feet here and your head will follow. I don't know if you saved my life, but you saved my marriage. And 2 years later, I graduated from college. So I want to end with a positive story. I went to my youngest son's PTA meeting years ago. And as I was walking out, the teacher said to me, could I speak to you, Mr. Gagliano? And I says, oh boy, here we go. When teachers wanted to talk to my parents about me, is either I was beating somebody up or somebody's beating me up. I was like, oh, go ahead. She said to me, what's your secret? What? What's your secret? I don't know what you mean. Here we go. I get a little emotional here. She said, your son talks about you with such love and respect. I never heard that before. I got 2 kids. What is your secret? How's that one? I could have said, well, it starts with 12-step meetings. You go to a psychiatrist, your wife leaves you, you go to a therapist, you write a bestseller. I figured that might be too much information. So I said, be curious with your kid. Keep talking. Best part of your day, worst part of your day. Keep talking. Build that relationship with your children. So in the next podcast, we're going to talk about parenting, how to give our children the positive and healthy messages that might have been denied to us. I'm going to give poll questions out there. Take a peek at that question. See where you rate on those questions. Then we're going to do one on couples intimacy, how to have healthy conversations, not shut down, run away, argue, how to move forward in your couples relationships. We're going to talk about addiction, how it starts, fragmentation, how addicts become fragmented, and how congruency is the key, and it's a we process. But you got to start to trust people, which is the toughest thing for addicts, because you want to not only stop your addiction, but you want to stay stopped. We'll talk about infidelity, digital infidelity, physical infidelity. How do you work through that? My God, that's so painful. And we're also going to talk about the roles that we're set up to play. We've been talking about that. We'll go in that into more detail. People pleaser, caretaker, defiant role, controlling role, perfectionist role, invisible role, addictive role. We'll have a podcast about that. And hopefully we'll get to that point where you could call in and ask me questions. But that's what lies ahead. I thank you for listening to me. I'm going to say again, take what you can that you can use. Leave the rest right here. You don't have to agree with everything I say. Be well, and I hope you join me in a couple of weeks. Thank you. You've been listening to The Problem Was Me with me, the host, Tom Gagliano. Tune in every first and third Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time on the Transformation Talk Radio as I help you break the cycle of negative and addictive thinking, affecting the emotional intimacy you have, your parenting skills, the careers you choose, even the roles you were set up to play. As a high-profile leader in addiction and self-help, I've helped develop unique methods and procedures which have helped numerous institutions and individuals. For more information on how I can assist you creating a healthier life, visit theproblemwasme.com.